protecting your assets before, during, and after marriage, because it is not only rich people who want to protect their assets, but up and coming people who see a future for themselves and want to make sure that, should they get married, that the other person doesn't unjustly enrich themselves. So there's several ways to do this. You can do this before you get married, and that is with a prenup, because prenuptial agreements, which is an agreement of how the assets should be divided should there be a separation or divorce. A prenuptial agreement is accepted in Ghana, even though we don't have legislation. Case law suggests that, there is a strong presumption in favor of acknowledging, or the courts acknowledging, prenuptial agreements. And the second way you can protect your assets, if you can show exceptional circumstances during an annulment procedure or an annulment petition before the court. And an annulment, again, is when there is something so exceptional or so different in the marriage that a court cannot deem it as a marriage, and so they reverse it. And so that's everything from, non-consummation, unsound mind, pregnancy, venereal disease, procedural defect, incest, impotence, as well as other specialist areas that you can claim. Now, getting back to this prenuptial agreement. A prenuptial agreement, basically, before you walk down the aisle, no matter how much love you have in your heart, you can sign an agreement with your partner, and this agreement can state how the marital assets would be shared between you in the event that the marriage fails. I don't think Ghanaian courts would go as far as a recent US court where they upheld a prenuptial agreement where the husband said that if the wife, put on a certain amount of weight or went beyond a certain amount of weight, then he was entitled to give her less money per year, etc. And the courts enforced it because this was decided before marriage, and she had legal counsel, and she signed such an agreement because I think she was a beauty queen or something. So it was really important to the husband that she looked a certain way. So the US court upheld this agreement, but Ghanaian courts will certainly not go that far because we are only just accepting prenuptial agreements. And initially, prenuptial agreements weren't accepted in Ghana because on public policy grounds. For instance, it's interfering with the sanctity of marriage if you are deciding that before marriage has even begun, it's ended because you've entered this agreement. So public policy wise, the courts initially didn't favor it, but recently there's been this shift towards the recognition and enforcement of prenuptial agreements, and it went back as far back as 1982, 1983 with a Champong and a Champong case, where the rights of the spouses in respect of any property are established or agreed, the court should uphold those rights, it was said in that case. So where the court finds that there was an agreement between the spouses about any property, it must give effect to that agreement. And that went back as far as 1982, 1983 case law. So it shows that the courts had started shifting, as it were. And a recent case in 2023 is Emmanuel Obeng versus Kate, and it's a Court of Appeal decision which favoured prenuptial agreement because it said that since a marriage is a contract, the parties have the right to enter into prenuptial agreement by which their right to create their individual property will be outlined. And so it acknowledges that, but it also considers the constitution in terms of, there is also a fine line between what you can agree on between yourself and constitutional rights when it comes to real property, etc. Therefore, it's really important to consult a lawyer whilst drafting a prenuptial agreement, because you never know who's going to be rich and famous, etc., etc. So even if you don't have that much money, it's probably a good idea to have a prenuptial agreement, and then in sort of a way test your partner to see what they would say about signing a prenuptial agreement. But yeah, So you can protect your assets before marriage, during marriage, and after marriage by having an agreement as to how the assets will be divided, and by, in very special circumstances, which takes specialist lawyers, having an annulment. So an annulment reverses the marriage as if it never existed. So the other spouse can't claim property rights and other rights that are normally associated with marriage, because you have demonstrated to the court that what you had wasn't a marriage. And again, that's because of unsound mind, non-consummation, pregnancy, venereal disease, procedural defects, incest, impotence, and other areas which I'm sure, should you go to a lawyer that specializes in this, which we do at Clinton Consultancy, they'll be able to tell you whether your circumstances are truly exceptional or whether you should simply just get a divorce but then try and enforce the prenuptial agreement in that. And also, one also has to consider as a third point the separation agreement, because even a separation agreement will be considered by the court, because if it's agreed between the parties how the assets should be decided, then at least the court will give mind to how it was decided after the breakup, how the assets should be divided. But ultimately, it's really, assets are an important thing. If you're rich, if you're not rich, but you're hopeful it's your future, and if you want to see how your partner's going to react to a prenup, etc. It's always best to not predict the worst, but also to protect yourself in any eventuality, so that you don't spend years wrangling over something that could have been decided on in a prenup, and something that could have been decided on during the marriage, and as a last case scenario with a prenup or with a separation agreement. And if not, then ultimately seeking an annulment only if you warrant such unique circumstances that the court will consider the evidence and the fact before them.